Hi, this is the Social Gelo with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Gelo with Angelo show. What's up? And thank you for watching Social Gelo with Angelo. Or, thank you for listening to Social Gelo with Angelo. My name's Angelo, as I mentioned earlier in the intro. Today's guest is Ramsey Dewey. Now, I have been working on the Kaju Kembo podcast lately, or the Kaju Kembo series of this podcast. And for the Kaju Kembo series, I tend to follow Kaju Kembo martial arts. If you don't know what that is, it's a Hawaiian martial art. I do encourage you to check it out. Read the Wikipedia page that was all put together by people much more higher in the hierarchy than me. And the reason I'm interviewing Ramsey Dewey, and I'm including it in the Kaju Kembo series, even though he is not a Kaju Kembo practitioner, I'm going to make that very clear. But I am going to put it in the Kaju Kembo series, mostly because of the interactions that I've had with Ramsey Dewey and the influence he had on me in my Kaju Kembo journey. So a little history. Normally we go right into the show. If you don't like it, just skip ahead. Ramsey Dewey's coming up. But let me let you know how I met Ramsey Dewey. I met Ramsey Dewey not on YouTube. Maybe some of you are watching this or listening to this because you know Ramsey Dewey from YouTube. I did not know Ramsey Dewey from YouTube. Giant disclaimer. I actually looked up Ramsey Dewey online. I didn't actually even look up Ramsey Dewey, to be honest. I was looking for a place to do MMA in China. I was going to China, and I know a lot of people go to China to do Wing Chun or Wushu, and they want to be very traditional on their approach. But I just kind of felt, after watching enough videos of, there was this guy, if you ever want to look up, here, I'll look him up right now. All right, and here it is. Here's a little bit of footage of this MMA guy who's been challenging Kung Fu masters. And his name is, I'm probably going to butcher this, his name is Shu Xiaodong. And he's going up to a lot of different people that say that they're Kung Fu masters, and he's pretty much, he's knocking them out left and right. Now, I really don't care what you feel about traditional martial arts versus modern martial arts, but I am going to say that this guy is really exposing some of the problems of people who may train in a traditional martial art and think that they know how to fight, and that might be very different from someone who actually trains on how to fight, right? It's a very different type of, how can I say, experience. Nothing against that. I like both parts of training. If you ever followed me or trained with me, you'll know that I've done both traditional martial arts, and I've also done more modern martial arts or combat martial arts like boxing, kickboxing. And I think that's what Kaju Kembo, that's the bow, right? We got the boxing and Kaju Kembo. So for anybody who's watching right now and being like, no, I can't believe you're a traitor. It's not that. I think there's great benefits that can come from traditional training. But I'm not going to fool myself into thinking that only traditional training is gonna be able to make me into a better fighter. I'm hoping that if you have an open mindset, it doesn't matter what you do. The more open you are to new ideas as a martial artist, or even as a person, be open to new ideas. Might be hard at first, but be open to new ideas, because I think that's where innovation takes place. So that's where Ramsey Dewey fits in to the Kaju Kembo series for my podcast. Check it out. All right, so I'm here with Ramsey Dewey, coming out of Shanghai, China. I mentioned in the intro earlier a little bit about him. How you doing today, brother?
Good. Thanks, Russ, man. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for coming out, or virtually coming out and being on the show. So
virtually coming out to Japan, man.
Yeah. You said you were trying to make your way out here one day, so I figured, we'd make it happen.
Speaking of Japan, Can you read kata? What is this called? Katakana?
Yeah, I can read katakana. It
Japanese.
says here, let's see if I can. Brazilian
Okay,
Jiu-Jitsu.
because
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It says Brazilian
okay,
Jiu-Jitsu on
that's
there.
what I thought it said. There was a company sponsoring the gym, and they gave us these T-shirts. And I was like, man, I hope it doesn't say anything stupid, like who knows? I
Yeah.
have no idea.
Yeah. They'll
But
do that too
yeah,
with the Japanese shirts. You got to be careful. But yeah, that one's legit. You're good. Nothing offensive. It's nothing ridiculous. It's on point.
yeah. I had a friend who got a tattoo in Chinese characters that said something along the lines of "I'm a stupid white guy who can't read Chinese." So
No. Oh no.
yes,
If there was ever a story of why not to get a tattoo in a different country in a language you don't understand, I think that would be a good poster board for it.
yeah, man.
So for those of you
The
listening,
life lesson.
um, again, Ramsey Dewey is a MMA coach from Shanghai, China. Ramsey, I'm sure I know you have a lot of followers on your YouTube channel, and you've shared tidbits of your story there. And I've personally talked to you, and you've divulged even more of your story. But just starting from scratch, I guess. How did you get into martial arts?
Oh man, how did I get into martial arts? I initially got into martial arts because I got bullied and beaten up at school, and I wanted to fight back. And so it was, how can I put this? Kids watch movies, like I saw Bruce Lee movies. I saw these action movies, these kung fu movies, and in my childhood mind, I thought that's the solution to my problems. If I could fight like that, if I could punch and kick and do kung fu, I could solve all my problems, and then I would be happy, right? But I lived in a small farming town in Idaho. We had more cows than people, meaning we did not have any martial arts schools. So um, I made my way to the local library where there were about 6 books on martial arts. I checked them all out, picked them off the shelf, and the first one I opened up, it was about karate. I thought, here are the answers, here are the magic tricks that will solve my problems. On the very first page, it said, martial arts is not magic. Martial arts requires hard work, dedication, strength, and all these other attributes that I totally lacked at the time. Discipline, for example. I was like, oh man, this sucks. This is getting hard. And so, I checked out the books. I did what I could. I practiced with my brothers in our front yard, trying to spar, whatever we were doing. And my first formal martial arts class, I was 17 years old. I went to Brigham Young University. I graduated high school a little early. And at this time, Mark Schultz, who fought in the UFC at this time, he was the wrestling coach at BYU. This is how I found out about MMA. So I was taking a Taekwondo class that was being held in the wrestling room, Mark Schultz wrestling room. And there's this giant 600-pound grappling dummy over in the corner. Nobody can move it. The Taekwondo coach says, yeah, you better leave that alone. That belongs to the wrestling coach. By the way, don't scratch up the mats, because he'll get really mad at me. He'll beat me up. And we all laughed, because this guy's a 6th-degree black belt in Taekwondo from Korea. We're like, a wrestler couldn't beat you up. You're like Bruce Lee. You can do all those kicks from the movies. He's like, guys, you don't understand. This guy is a real fighter. Not like me. He fights in a cage with no rules, no time limits, nothing. He's a real fighter. And I had never seen cage fighting at the time. Very few people had. Very few people knew about the UFC unless they knew a guy who knew a guy who had a copy of an old VHS of a pay-per-view, except for the very few who were actually there. And I was like, what is this cage fighting thing? What is this? I want to know more. And so I would stalk the wrestling room a lot to try to get a glimpse of this. This was when, like, Chael Sonnen was wrestling at BYU at that time before he transferred to Oregon. So there were a lot of guys who ended up becoming MMA fighters who just kind of gravitated around this wrestling room. Guys like Hank Weiss, he became a very interesting MMA fighter. Chael Sonnen, for example, Mark Schultz was doing his thing. So that's how I first found out about MMA. Now, I didn't start competing in MMA or training for it for years, because it was just always this thought in the back of my mind. I thought, oh, grappling, I don't want to do that. It's weird. I just want to punch and kick. I want to be a kickboxer. I want to be a Taekwondo guy. So I finished college, and I ran into some financial struggles. And I was working a bunch of jobs, trying to make ends meet, and I wasn't. And I found out that there was this fight promoter in Salt Lake City, and they paid people $50 to go fight, and 50 more if you could win. And I thought, okay, that's all I need is 50 extra bucks a month. I'm going to do this. So I signed up for a kickboxing match, and I did some kickboxing matches with them. I won some, I lost some. Then eventually I got talked into doing a Muay Thai fight. I had no Muay Thai experience. I did that. I was like, huh, well, that's interesting. So I kept going with that for a while. And then I got challenged on the internet to an MMA fight by this guy that I had beaten previously in a kickboxing match. He told me, you think you're such a hotshot kickboxer? Well, if it was an MMA fight, actually they called it NHB back then. Nobody said MMA. No, NHB, no holds barred. If we did an NHB fight, I'd totally kill you, man. And I'm a pragmatic person, so I said, okay, I beat you once, I can do it again. Let's do it. So I get in the cage with this guy. And fortunately, he kind of sucked. He didn't know what he was doing. But I didn't know that. And so I go in there. If you look at my Sherdog record, it says I won by guillotine choke. That's not true. I got a front headlock on him. I broke his posture, got a front headlock, and I started throwing lipper shots. I landed like 4 of them. He crumpled to the ground. He starts tapping out. The referee doesn't see it, so I keep hitting him until he taps big enough for the referee to see. And I thought, well, that was incredibly easy. I didn't even need to know how to grapple, but I actually ended up breaking my foot in that fight because he did pick me up and slam me at one point. But I ended up winning via strikes, not a guillotine, as Sherdog says. One of many inaccuracies on that website. But so I thought, I'm going to do it again. MMA is not that tough. It's not that hard. So I did a few more MMA fights until I fought this guy who actually knew how to wrestle well. And he took me down pretty easily, transitioned him out very easily, and started dropping elbows on my face. And there was nothing I could do about it. And I realized right there and then, what I am is not enough. What I can do is not enough. I need to become a mixed martial artist. And so from that point on, like, even though I was like 3 MMA deep into my pro fighting career, because these were pro fights. There was no amateur intro. Like in the state of Utah, if you fight professionally as a kickboxer or a boxer, at least back then, that was the rule. And then you make a transition to MMA. It has to be professional. So there was no baby steps along the way, if you will. Got thrown in with the sharks pretty early on.
So, if I can pause you for a sec.
Sure.
That transition you made from Taekwondo. So you came from Taekwondo. Yes. You found Taekwondo. How old were you? Because you said you were a kid. How old were you when you found Taekwondo?
I was 17 when I took my first Taekwondo class.
Oh, wow. So you weren't a kid. You were almost done with being a teenager. Okay.
Almost done. Almost 18 years old.
All right. So you were 17 when you found Taekwondo. And then following your timeline, how much longer until you went from Taekwondo to kickboxing? We'll say there. When did that happen?
I think my first pro kickboxing match, I was age 24. And I'd never trained for the sport of kickboxing. I thought, it's punches and kicks. It's just like Taekwondo. How hard can it be? I'd never put on a set of boxing gloves before.
Whoa.
Never did a fight in just, boxing shorts without a shirt or anything like that. And I got to tell you, it felt really weird doing that. That's something nobody tells you, is all these little incidental variables of fighting. I mean, you go to the gym, they teach you techniques. They don't tell you how bright lights are. They don't tell you how hot the mat can get if it's an artificial surface. They don't tell you not to get distracted by the ring girls. They don't tell you the sounds the crowd is going to be making. They don't tell you about the anxiety or any of these things. They just teach you fighting techniques. And then you go in the cage, and it's this radically different thing than the gym, or you get in a boxing ring, radically different thing than a gym. But yeah, I'd done a number of traditional martial arts. There were a bunch of martial arts clubs at my university. So I did Taekwondo, I did Shotokan karate at the same time, I did capoeira, all these striking arts, all these stand-up arts, basically.
Okay, so it wasn't. So you did
So
have like a different. It wasn't like you were a strict Taekwondo guy, very limited contact to being punched in the face in your training, and then just jumping straight into kickboxing. You had other styles. You kind of worked with different rules. You didn't just spar like Taekwondo. You know how Taekwondo has the focus, right? They don't. They kick to
yeah,
the head and focus
yeah,
punch to the
there's
face.
no striking to face,
Yeah.
World
Yes.
Taekwondo Federation style.
Yeah. But you actually did other
Yeah, I mean, I've
styles.
been punched in the face, but not that much, not that often, not that frequently, and not with the intensity. So the guy I fought was an amateur boxer who decided to try kickboxing, and I think he had some karate experience as a child, but he was an amateur boxer. That was his thing, and I thought, amateur boxer, how tough can that be? And this guy just lit me up with his hands in a kickboxing match. And that was revelatory too. I mean, that really got me to respect the art of boxing as a martial art and something every fighter needs to do. Because if you can't address the issues answered by boxing, you really don't belong in a fight, any type of fight. And similarly with mixed martial arts, if you can't address the issues answered by wrestling or jiu-jitsu or all these other basic fundamental positional styles, you really don't belong in a fight. I mean, this is stuff everybody needs to know, but it sounds so self-evident today. Today, people growing up watching the UFC, and they're like, duh, of course you need to know how to box and wrestle and do jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, whatever. Everyone knows it. Nobody knew that back then. Everybody was so dogmatic. It's crazy how that is. Like 30 years previously, Bruce Lee was preaching against dogmatism, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, we get it. But they didn't really. They didn't really, man.
So how did your
And even today,
how did you back then? I understand that too. Like coming from a similar thing, people were very, like you said, Bruce Lee was there, but there was a very like a stylistic mentality of this style is the best, so you shouldn't cross train. How did your coaches or how did your senseis? I don't know what terms they use in Taekwondo, but how did your instructors handle you saying, "Oh, I want to do different. I want to mix it up. I want to do some Shotokan. I want to do some Kupara." Were they okay with that?
some of them not very well, man. Some of them were not. So here's the thing: there was like this big rift between Shotokan karate and Taekwondo, especially the instructors. So I had this instructor from Cambodia. This dude didn't call him, and this was so serious. He was the Taekwondo coach, and he was like, "Man, this guy lived through like the killing fields of Cambodia. Like he was so serious. He was like, this is not a game. This is war." We were like, "Whoa, chill, man, chill." But he was so intense, and man. But he was. I had like 5 different Taekwondo instructors. This guy was all about Taekwondo is survival, self defense. It's not a game. I had a coach who was I think she was a bronze or silver medalist. I don't remember in the Olympics, but she was all about the competition format, like scoring points, winning sparring sessions, and so on. I had this other guy, Burton Sparks. This dude was all about breaking stuff. Like, man, that was his emphasis. Like, hit really hard and smash stuff. I mean, he was a fun guy to train with. And I had a few other Taekwondo coaches as well. But man, the Shotokan coach, I'm blanking on his last name, but Sensei Paul, man, Paul, he was an older gentleman. It's been so long since I saw him. But what was so funny is everything he taught. The forms in Taekwondo are, I'm going to offend people saying this, but they're exactly the same as Shotokan. They just rearrange them to look like the 10 grams on the Korean flag. That's all they do, but it's the exact same movement. It's the same exact syllabus of movement. Taekwondo and Shotokan are basically the same martial art. But on each side, they are so dogmatic, and they will tell you, no, our style is far superior to theirs. Our roundhouse kick is like this, and theirs is like this, and it's the same dang thing. So we would get a lot of preaching, like, yeah, when they found out that I was cross-training, I remember I was at the Capoeira club, and all these clubs were on the same campus, right? And one day my Taekwondo coach walked by, and he sees me training with the Capoeira club, and he gives me the look of death, like, how could you do this? You've betrayed me. And I remember I remember he was walking with some of the members of the club, and he said, "Ramsey's not one of us anymore. He's doing something else now. Don't associate with him." And I was like, "What the heck, man?" And I remember I went back to Taekwondo class, and he's like shunning me. He's shunning me. He's like, "You do not have what it takes to be a Taekwondo black belt. You do not." He's like, "What is your problem, man?" He's like, "You're one of them now." It was like you had to pick a side back then. It's so dumb. It's so dumb, but this still happens. This totally still happens. I have a good friend. I won't mention his name because he trains at multiple Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools. And if they found out about each other, he would never get promoted again, ever. Because they have this very strict policy. Don't cross-train at another gym. They are not like us. It's us or them. Right? It's stupid, but martial arts are super dogmatic. They always have been. They probably always will be to some extent.
So you did your cross training. You got shunned. You got shunned for not. For,
Oh yes, I got shunned.
For mixing it up. And for those of you listening, I know a lot of you follow the Kaju Kembo podcast, the series I do there, and I talk about how I didn't have that much of a problem in our system. We were allowed to just let our instructor know. Our instructor just asks to let them know. You know, I want to do some cross training. What do you think of this style, or what do you think of this school? Have you heard anything? And they kind of give you an okay depending on if that school is a school that is doesn't have a bad reputation or anything. But otherwise than that, if everything's clear, you know, you're pretty much allowed to mix it up, which is a little different from how some styles can be. But even within Kaju Kembo, I've met some guys that are really dogmatic that, you know, only Kaju Kembo and you shouldn't train in anything else, you know. But there's not that many of them, but they exist. They do exist. So, but you started mixing it up.
It's also funny as far as fighting goes. Like if you're fighting professionally, and they introduce you as a Taekwondo fighter or a Taekwondo black belt or something like that, if you win, suddenly all the Taekwondo nerds want to claim you. They're like, "Oh, he's one of ours." If you lose, they're like, "Oh, that's not Taekwondo. This guy sucks. He's not one of us." When you put a label on it, man, that's how it goes.
Yeah, with Kaju Kembo, like I said, I haven't personally met many people that would get upset about mixing it up. Most of the times that they would get upset was if a student, like as an instructor, some Kaju Kembo guys would get upset if a student decided to go somewhere cross-train and not say anything. That's the only time they would get upset. So if they started cross-training and felt like they had to keep that a secret from the instructor would get upset for not just letting them know. Just let me know. That way we know that you're training somewhere else and we can figure out, you know, what you want to do and that kind of thing. But yeah, as far as being super dogmatic, they're a little more open. I mean, of course, like it's a little it's not as old as Taekwondo. You know, it came out in the 50s, so it's got a little more of a background with people that came from like professional boxing. I think the founder used to be a professional boxer, so they're a little more open to it.
Taekwondo's not that old. It started in the 1950s as well.
Oh,
officially.
Really? Huh. Okay. Well, yeah. I don't know much about the history of Taekwondo. That's new to me. 50s, huh? So.
Yeah, basically some Korean martial artists got together and said, "Hey, let's make like an amalgam." And they came up with Taekwondo, mostly kicking, but yeah. Started in the 1950s.
A lot of stuff got started, right? I think the history of Kempo starts around the 50s as well. Like American Kempo starts around the 50s, around the same thing.
Most traditional martial arts aren't that old.
Yeah.
And that shocks a lot of people because they think they're like ancient, go back thousands of years. Like most traditional martial arts come in the 1900s.
Judo's 1930s,
generally, like after,
right?
Yeah.
I think 1930s was judo, around there.
Well, it depends on when you consider the founding. Like if you consider the founding of the Kodokan, the beginning of judo, or Jigoro Kano developing his own style of Kano Jiu-Jitsu as the founding of judo, or if you consider when they officially had all the colored belts in the system as the founding of judo, or when it got introduced to the as the founding of judo. I mean, they're all very different eras in the development of judo. But yeah, Jigoro Kano was developing in the late 1800s.
Okay.
It really became codified in the early 1900s,
Okay.
and it didn't really become the sport that we know today until really the 1980s.
Oh wow.
When they changed the rules substantially and took away all the leg attacks.
That was like
and
for the
most of the ground.
That was like for the Olympics, right? They're like when they kind of tried to put together the thing for the
Yeah.
for the Olympics. All right, sorry, got sidetracked. We're gonna get back. I'm gonna try to reel us back into your story.
Okay.
Reeling us back in. You mixed it up. Then you started doing kickboxing, but you did mix it up. You said you didn't do any formal kickboxing training before your first kickboxing match.
Oh, not at that point.
Okay, but you went in there. You did your kickboxing match. So now you did your kickboxing match. It was an amateur match. It was a pro match.
It was professional.
Oh wow! So just
It was a professional.
like you said, there was no divisions back then. It was, hey, either you are in all the way, or you're not doing this at all. So you stepped in as first first fight, starting off pro as a kickboxer. You do your thing. You do the kickboxing.
Yep.
One of the guys you beat, if I'm following this timeline correctly, how old are you at this point? So you were 17 in Taekwondo. You start mixing it up. You do your first kickboxing match at
age 24.
24. So 24 do the kickboxing match. Around 24.
Yeah.
Then you start doing that for a little bit. You're doing it for money, like you said, $50 entry. Get some $50 back. Get your 100.
Yeah, the biggest paycheck I ever got for kickboxing, and this surprises people, I think it was $350, and that was including the win bonus. Like kickboxing, American kickboxing was extremely low paying. Like if you read Chuck Liddell's biography, like when he won the world championship, he made like $500 for that. In his that's in his biography, Iceman, and I read that. It was like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean,
like the highest paycheck I ever got was $350 for kickboxing. It was not a high paying sport. It was like it's something you had to love to do.
Yeah, and I mean, like
if you didn't enjoy it, there was no point doing it. Man.
I mean, arguably now with MMA, now that they added the amateur divisions, when you take in consideration the blood work, the transportation to the fight, whether you win or lose, a lot of times on the amateur undercards, you're pretty much paying to fight.
Yes.
So $100 was not bad, really. $50 to get in and $50 if you win. That's a good deal.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's what I was making when I started out.
So you got in there. Someone challenged you to an MMA fight. You beat them, as you mentioned earlier, and you decided to. After you lost to the wrestler, you decided that, hey, this grappling thing, I need to figure it out, and you started doing more.
Yeah.
MMA training, more wrestling training.
Yeah.
What was your transition from there?
At that point, I got introduced to one of my dearest, best friends in the whole world, and one of the best coaches I ever met. This guy named Shane Brenner. So he was a professional fighter, and he sent me an email. He said, "Hey man, I've seen you struggling out there, and I want to help you." And I'd seen this guy fight, and he was a monster. He seemed like a killer in the cage. I was like, man, is this guy gonna beat me up? He's like, come to my home gym. I've got a gym in my. I was like, is he gonna like murder me in his basement? I don't know, because he's just a scary looking guy. So I go over to his house, and he meets me at the door. He's like, hey, you come in, and I made lunch. Check this out, man. And he's got like this like homemade craft salad type of thing that he's made. I'm like, you're feeding me? This is not what I was expecting. So we go down to the basement, and he's like, I know what you need. You need some experience. And he just took me under his wing and took so much time out of his life, out of his busy schedule, to fill in all the holes in my game. And man, I can't be more grateful to Shane Brenner. Man, big shout out to Shane. Just invested hundreds of hours of training into me. But one of the most important things that he drilled in my head was the concept of learning how to learn, which is something every fighter needs to know. I know it sounds hokey. It sounds like something a high school coach would shout at the team before they go out there, guys, you got to learn how to learn how to learn. But it's true. You got to learn how to learn. because it's one thing being shown a technique. It's another thing being able to assimilate the technique and add it to your game. It's another thing entirely to be able to learn of your own, to learn on your own, to learn of your own free will and volition without having to be led to the water, if you will. So man, this was game changing for me. This is what got me interested in coaching, because I realized, man, if somebody as worthless at grappling as I was could learn how to grapple, because this guy was able to teach me the way, then I realized, man, anybody, any able-bodied person has that capacity to learn. And I thought, man, I want to do that. I want to do for other people what he did for me. So sometime later, I ended up opening up my own gym. It was a small one. I invited people to train for free at first. I was just like, man, I just need the experience. So I invited people to train for free. I ended up coaching a bunch of fighters who went out there, fought professionally, won a bunch of fights, and it was so interesting. I started seeing patterns. I started seeing patterns when I watched fights, because I watched every single fight I could. I watched every UFC fight that I could afford to get the pay-per-view. I watched every amateur fight. I watched every. They used to have this like pro fight show, local one. They would show at 3 a.m. in the morning. You had to stay up and watch it on the cable access. I'd watch every episode of that and just digest it. I'd record them with VHS tapes and play them back in slow motion, try to pick them apart frame by frame to figure out, like, how do you beat this guy? How do you solve this problem? What's this half guard thing all about? You know, back when nobody knew what half guard was. And man, it was incredibly educational. I was having this conversation yesterday with some of my students, because they're taking out their cell phones and filming the sparring, which is something I heavily encourage them to do. I was telling them, believe it or not, there was a time where you couldn't do this. People didn't have portable high-definition cameras in their pockets at all times. You had to go to some crazy lengths to get some visual feedback on your fighting. So anyway, I went off on a tangent there, but
No. That's good. That's a good tangent. That's a good tangent to go on. Going into your timeline, obviously those experiences really influence on how you coach now. And one of the questions I ask all my guests that are also instructors is that transition from fighting, training, and teaching, right? You started off, you were being bullied. A lot of martial artists, and for those of you listening to it that are martial artists or listen to my show for the few psychology episodes that I stopped doing a while ago, a lot of martial artists have a very similar story here, where we always start off with some experience that made us want to start training. A lot of it, usually bullying. Get into it, get better, get into this weird transition where, hey, it's no longer really about me being able to defend myself. I'm confident that I can defend myself. But then it's about being confident in defending yourself against someone who is also skilled. And that kind of starts setting you off in a total different path. And then you start getting better at that. And then at one point you start thinking, wow, I know all these things. I want to teach other people. I want to show other people what I learned. So obviously, what was the coach's name that you just mentioned?
Shane Brenner.
Yeah, Shane Brenner influenced you in a way that you said, I really want to teach. Like, this is something that I really want to teach people what he taught me how to do, I want to do for others. How old were you when this happened?
Oh, I was in my mid-20s. Between my mid-20s to about age 30. That's when I moved to China at age 30. So I think I met Shane. I was probably about 26. We trained together for about 4 years, and parted ways when I moved to China. That was one of the hardest things to leave behind, because I sold everything that I owned, got rid of my gym, did all this stuff in order to move to China. Just dropped the world behind. The hardest part was leaving my coaches and training partners and students and the fighters I trained with and all these guys. Because stuff and things, you can buy that again. Like you can't bring the people with you. On the other hand, but yeah,
And in that moment, so you were still fighting. You were now in your MMA career. You know, you now transitioned out of kickboxing into MMA. You're fighting professionally because back then there was no divisions like we talked about. You're fighting professionally as an MMA fighter, and you built your gym. Um, and where was this again? Where did you build your gym?
the first one, it was in the city of Murray, Utah. It's a suburb of Salt Lake City.
All right.
Basically, that was my first gym.
So you built your gym while you're fighting. You have your gym. Like you said, you were offering free lessons because you just wanted to get people in the door and start training.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along on this path, you're teaching. And you kind of already answered my question earlier when you said how that influenced you to want to teach when you were training with your other coach. Now you have some students, you're teaching them.
I'm
What?
going to cut you off really quick about this word teaching. Because I taught martial arts before.
Okay.
I'd spent years teaching Taekwondo, for example. And teaching Taekwondo, teaching a traditional martial art, and here's what separates traditional martial arts from combat sports, really, in my opinion, is that when you teach a traditional martial art, you are teaching a tradition. You have to move in this exact way or it's not Taekwondo. If you do something different, it's no longer Taekwondo. And that's something you can teach. Put your hands and feet here, basically. Coaching, though, that's a different thing. Coaching is facilitating the process of winning fights as far as combat sports goes. So as far as Taekwondo, teaching Taekwondo, this is teaching somebody how to throw a roundhouse kick, how to throw a side kick, how to throw an axe kick, how to do the forms, right? That's a radically different process than facilitating winning fights. So there are Taekwondo teachers who teach how to do the movements. There are Taekwondo coaches who teach you how to win Taekwondo competitions. I was a teacher before. I made the transition to becoming a coach. And that's a radically different thing. So coaching cage fighters versus teaching technique. I mean, coaches can teach technique. Often they do. I mean, I do. I teach technique classes every day. But coaching transcends that, I believe. It's a different thing. It's a different skill set.
And so kind of going off of that, would you say going from Taekwondo, I guess, to ask you the question that I ask everyone, when did you know, now we're going to go back in your story, in your timeline, when did you know that you wanted to teach martial arts, whether it was traditional or not traditional? When did you finally say, I'm not just a student, I want to teach, that's something I want to do? Or was that forced upon you? Because I know some schools are just like it or not, hey, you're teaching now, but how did that work out?
You know, I think the first time I really wanted to teach martial arts was when I started having fundamental disagreements with some of my old martial arts instructors. Because I remember I was sparring with one of my coaches, and you know, this Taekwondo black belt, and we're sparring, and he says, we're going to spar not just Taekwondo sparring. You can do anything. You can grapple, you can do judo, you can wrestle, you can do whatever you want. And I thought, okay. So we are grappling, and I punch him in the face. And this does not go over well. Does not go over well at all. Suddenly it's like, no, that's not the way, because you did. And there were all these excuses coming in. It's like, this is bad teaching. I would be a better teacher than this guy. He has a higher rank. He has the respect of the class, but he doesn't know what he's doing. As far as teaching, he's not teaching me to win fights. He's not teaching me to accomplish my goal. He's teaching me to respect a hierarchy. And that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all at the end of the day.
So let me get this straight.
So that's what I was getting at him.
He said you could do anything you want, but then when you punched him in the face, he was upset. Oh, okay.
Yes. Yes.
Well, to contrast that, I got asked by one of my students the other day why he said he told me Joe Rogan, and this is going to be we're going to go on a little sidestep here, but he told me Joe Rogan is a fighter, or was a retired fighter. And I kind of cringed a little bit because I have a lot of respect for Joe Rogan, but even he talks about on his show how he did Taekwondo, and he did some kickboxing.
Yeah.
But one of the things that turned him
He
off,
also did 2 kickboxing matches.
he did 2 kickboxing matches, and he talked about how,
as far as I know,
turned him off to kickboxing was getting punched in the face. That was one of the things that really discouraged him from wanting to do kickboxing because of the Taekwondo background. He opens that up, and that's why he got out of it. That was one of the things that kind of set him down the way. And I told him, like, because I was telling him Taekwondo is a traditional martial art, but a lot of the guys, and I don't know how it was from the area you're in, but in Southern California, a lot of the Taekwondo guys infamously would get very upset if you punched them in the face. Even if you were standing, in your case, you were on the ground when you did it. But like if we were standing, they would be equally as upset because they really don't, even if they open it up. Because like the Kaju Kembo studio was shared with a Taekwondo school, and my instructor warned us, when you train with the Taekwondo guys, be careful with the contact, and just be careful all around because they are a different style and they have different approaches to their things. Respect the instructors when you're there, but be careful and don't talk back to anyone if you're a colored belt. Don't be getting into arguments with anyone. But that was one of the things that really was really distinctual between Kaju Kembo and Taekwondo, is the Taekwondo guys really did get upset if you punched them in the face, and we try to avoid doing that when we visit their classes. Oh, yeah. So that's
you get basically 1 of 2 reactions when you punch a guy in the face who isn't accustomed to it, who doesn't train for that. Either they will kind of run away and get really timid, or they'll get super aggressive and super angry, and you'll see they just get this animal look in their eyes. And then they try to hurt you back, and they try to hurt you worse.
Yeah, and nothing against Taekwondo. I'm just like I've said this before on the show. Nothing against Taekwondo. It's just the differences that you'll find when you're looking at a more of a traditional martial art that has a certain set of rules that they follow, and more of a non-traditional martial art that mixes different stuff, different sets of rules. So you decided at that point that you wanted to teach. That was your inspiration at that point. You wanted to teach.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that.
And that kind of turned into this new thing where you started teaching. At that point, when you made that decision, you decided that you were going to start teaching a different approach to Taekwondo, or did you say you wanted to start teaching MMA, or what was that first click for you?
And that's a good question, because I didn't want to teach the same thing. I didn't want to teach like this respect for the hierarchy above all else. I didn't want to teach something ineffective like, oh, you can't punch people in the face and the floor is lava and all these other silly rules that don't exist in the real world. But at the same time, I didn't want to be one of those goofy guys who makes up their own martial art and gives it a funny sounding Asian name to try to sound more authentic. And then people are like, so you made up your own martial art, now you're the grandmaster. I'm like, no, I didn't want to have that experience, because I'd seen that go down badly many, many times. Or I'd seen people take a martial art like Taekwondo, put the word combat in front of it. Combat Taekwondo. This isn't that sissy Taekwondo. This is the real stuff. Or what else? Combat Aikido. Combat anything. It's ridiculous how many craptacular martial artists stick the word combat in front of a martial art that kind of sucks in order to try to legitimize it. And I didn't want to go down that route, so I didn't really know what to do at the time, because I didn't know what MMA was. And I thought, well, should I make up my own style? Should I just say I'm teaching fighting, because that's not very marketable? So MMA really made that easy to essentially sell the art of fighting, because that's what it is. It's the act of fighting, right? And I didn't want to teach self-defense, and this shocks a lot of people, because they tend to associate martial arts as self-defense. Self-defense is a legal term. Self-defense is justifying to a court of law your violent actions which otherwise would have been illegal. And self-defense, like real self-defense, if you're worried about multiple opponents who are bigger and stronger than you attacking you with weapons, your fleshy little fists don't do very much against that. So real self-defense is be the guy with more friends with you and more and better weapons with you, and be bigger and stronger than the other guys. And yeah, and hire a lawyer so you know how to justify that in a court of law. I mean, that's real self-defense. You don't get that by learning how to throw the perfect punch in most situations. So I didn't want to go down the self-defense route. I was like, I love martial arts. I love the act of gaining physical mastery over the human body in the context of hand-to-hand combat. Like that's something that just really resonates with me greatly. Ritual combat. All animals, not all animals, but a lot of animals participate in one-on-one single combat, ritual combat, without the intention to kill each other. Like lizards do this. All types of lizards do this. Frogs do it. Sheep do it. Goats do it. Bighorn sheep do it. Kangaroos do it. So many different animals do it. They engage in ritual combat with each other. And sometimes it's over territory, sometimes it's over mating rights, sometimes it's play fighting to teach themselves survival skills, and sometimes they just do it for no discernible reason. But almost all animals with a backbone and arms and legs and a mouth engage in ritual combat. So it should come as no surprise that humans do this too. We build up a lot of pageantry around it, sometimes with cage fights and spectacles and bring girls and all this stuff to go on, but it's the same thing, and that's something I wanted to participate in. That's something I wanted to do. But coming up with a name or a brand for that before MMA was a thing was incredibly dicey territory. Like if you look at Greg Jack, he originally called his style Gaido Jutsu, which is some bastardized Japanese version of what he believed meant the art of the street or something like that. But he wanted to give it an Asian-sounding name to make it sound more legit back in the era where everybody wanted to do an Asian martial art. And if it didn't have Japanese characters behind it or Chinese characters on it, it wasn't cool, right? And you look back at that now, it sounds so cheesy. Gaido Jutsu, what's that all about? But again, Greg Jackson, one of the premier mixed martial arts coaches out there. So, yeah, back in the day before MMA, what would you call mixed martial arts training back then?
Yeah, I mean arguably that's what the guys in our Kaju Kembo system tried to do, right? That's why they came up with a Japanese sounding name, Kaju Kembo, to try to mix the karate, the judo, the jiu-jitsu, the danryu jiu-jitsu, and the kempo with the kung fu techniques, and then the bo for boxing. But at the end of the day, when I say this to a Japanese person, they almost think it sounds Japanese because it's got the Kaju Kembo. You can say it in their language, but they always look at you and start scratching their head like, it sounds like you said something in Japanese, but you didn't. So yeah, like I totally understand this idea of like, back then, because there was no MMA, they had to come up with different stuff, and it usually ended up sounding cheesy. I think what's the guy Benny the Jet Rodriguez? He also came up with I forgot the name. He has another, and he's another like really like prominent figure in the MMA community from doing kickboxing back in the day. But even he had the same problem because he didn't come from a kickboxing was not really kickboxing either, and I forgot what it is. If you look on Facebook, he has some really strange sounding name for his martial art, which is essentially just more MMA and kickboxing. But again, like it does get into dicey territory trying to name something or adding extreme to it. I've seen extreme something or other in front of it to try to get it out there. So, but you did
extreme Wing Chun.
Yeah. So you decided to do it though, and you started what did you end up calling it? I guess, did you call it anything, or what did you do? How did you solve that?
No, I didn't call it anything. I mean, I taught Taekwondo for a while, and there was a point I ended up getting a job at this gym. They were looking for a karate instructor, and I was like, well, my belt's in Taekwondo, but I need a job, and they probably don't care. In fact, the the first prominent Taekwondo instructor in the United States, changed the name to karate because people had heard the name karate. Blanking on the guy's name, but he opened up a chain of schools in Texas, which is now the most prominent lineage of karate in the United States, and it's not even karate, it's Taekwondo, but by a different name. So I went and taught this karate class for a while, and I'd done karate before, so I just put on my karate gi and put on my black belt, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. Maybe that's a fraudulent thing to do. I don't know, but nobody cared. They wanted to learn how to punch and how to kick. They wanted to learn how to do all the cool moves. They wanted to put on a uniform, do some Japanese cosplay, and feel good about themselves and get a workout and work up a sweat. Later on, however, after I moved to China, I wrote a vlog. Not a vlog, a blog. Yes, that's the written tag. I wrote a blog about Krav Maga and some really negative experiences I've had with Krav Maga, and just dozens and dozens of Krav Maga instructors I've met who just absolutely sucked at Krav Maga. They sucked at fighting. They sucked at self-defense. They couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. I wrote a vlog about this. Got some very negative reviews from Krav Maga practitioners. But because of this, when you searched for Shanghai China and Krav Maga on Google, the first website to come up was mine. And so I got contacted, emails, like dozens of emails from women who wanted to learn Krav Maga for self-defense. Said, can you teach me Krav Maga for self-defense? And I was so tempted to say yes, because I could make more money that way and just, teach them how to fight for real. But I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm I'm just going to tell them no. And I fought the temptation to tell them Krav Maga sucks because, whatever, let them live their fantasy. How many people are actually going to end up getting in a fight anyway? A few. Maybe it's a big disservice, but yeah, that's my story about branding. Martial arts is so weird. Giving them labels and names. I mean, I know in a way we have to because everything has to have a name. That's how languages work. But when you start pigeonholing the art of fighting into these little niches with little labels, it gets weird. Because when a fight happens, like a real fight happens, the referee doesn't come and pull you apart and say, hey, no clinching, no hitting below the belt, no this, no that. It just happens. It happens organically, and you go through all these different ranges of combat. For example, if you watch a street fight with two guys who don't know anything, what happens? They shout angry words, maybe they push, they start throwing haymakers. After the first punch connects, they follow an instinct to grab the other guy and squeeze him. And they get into a goofy schoolyard bully headlock or something like that. They tumble on the ground. Maybe they slug each other on the ground a few times. Their friends come and pull them apart. And that's it. They give them a face-saving exit. And in that stupid little street fight, we see all the major ranges of combat. We see the stand-up phase outside the pocket. We see a striking phase. We see a clinching phase. We see a takedown. We see a ground fighting phase. And it's bad. It's not technical, but it's all the major ranges of combat that a fight can happen in. And if you look at an MMA fight, you see the same thing, just more sophisticated, but it's the same thing. But then if you look at almost any other martial art with extremely restrictive rules, like the floor is lava, so we can't go there. You can't do this. You can't grab this. You can't do that. Suddenly we create these, silly artificial limitations. And it's good to give yourself limitations in training. Because when we give ourselves limitations, we come up with questions. When we have questions, we come up with answers. But to give yourself limitations when it comes to fight time is weird, man. It's weird.
It creates a strange space where you have people who become very successful at one niche, and then they believe that they actually know how to fight. And maybe in some cases they do. In a lot of cases they don't. And I think that's where anybody who's really fought either because they were in the military and they were in a real combat situation, or they ended up in a bad neighborhood like I did, or in your case, someone who stepped into the cage, anybody who's really fought will look at that and immediately see, wait a second, this person says they're and I'm not even going to pick on a martial art here, this person says they're a ... champion of this, but then when they see the practice, anybody who's been in any real fight will look at it and be like, well, this isn't real fighting. Anybody who's been in a real fight will look at it right away, and this weird itch in the back of their head will be like, this isn't real fighting. And then, I mean, it's up to the person from there to discern what they can take from that. I always like to use the analogy of tools. When you look at styles that are really stylistic, they're like tools. Point sparring is a tool. You can learn things about distance and timing and how to be explosive from point sparring. Does it teach you how to fight? It's a tool, but if you only use point sparring, then you're completely neglecting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But if you only do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you still might not know how to fight, because now you're completely neglecting how to strike. So, like, again, not picking on any one style, they're all tools. But kind of going into what you're saying as far as, you know, the marketing, the branding is really difficult when you start saying, hey, I want to teach people how to do cage fighting. And then cage fighting, right? If you have your average person on the street who knows what cage fighting is, or your average soccer mom, where you tell them, hey, let's teach you some cage fighting, it can kind of turn them off to the idea of wanting to train.
Yeah. Because they want a brand that they can trust. I mean, they've heard all these other soccer moms say, we go to this Krav Maga school over here. I just made up a martial art right there. And Karen down the street, you know, she really likes it and says it's a great workout. And so they trust it. They trust that name. They learn to trust whatever label is thrown at them. And then they hear some guy on the internet like me say, yeah, Krav Maga sucks. You should learn how to fight for real instead. Go do some MMA. What's MMA? It's cage fighting.
Yeah. It's too rough. That's too
Karen
real.
down the street isn't going to like that very much.
Well, Karen doesn't like a lot of things, and she's always calling the manager, so we can't always... Just kidding. If your name is Karen, we know we're not picking. We're not. It could have been Sarah or anybody else. Sorry, Karen, if for any Karens listening.
One of my students in recent memory was named Karen. So, in a great twist of irony.
So, what brought you? I'm running out of time here, but I do want to figure out what brought you to China. What got you there? You said it was a difficult decision for you. You wanted to stay because you already had students in a gym. But what brought you to China?
Yeah. Man, there's really no big story there. I mean, my wife wanted to do something different with her life. She was really unhappy with her job, and we had a lot of talks about, well, man, what can we do different? And we just had this idea, like, what if we go to Asia? Let's go to China. Yeah, I've seen some Chinese movies. It looks interesting. Let's go give that a try. So she was teaching driver's education at the time, and she had a student from Shanghai, and he worked for the Shanghai Normal University, Shanghai Shifan Dashui, and he said, hey, I'll hook you up with some jobs at the university. We were like, you can do that? He was like, yeah, of course I can. So he got us some jobs over at Shanghai Normal University. I ended up teaching in the Department of International Tourism, which is a weird story because I originally got hired on as a Spanish teacher because I got a Spanish degree. And I got there and they're like, teach the international tourism students. I was like, I don't have a degree in that. They were like, it's okay. Just tell them about American culture. So I ended up teaching this American culture class. It's like a social studies class, all about the culture of the United States, because they're training to be tour guides to Chinese-speaking people in America, or people who are traveling to America. So that was an interesting experience. At the same time I was doing that, I ended up opening the first MMA gym in Shanghai, the second publicly available one in China. I mean, there were some teams, like the China top team was at the Xi'an Sports University. That was not open to the public. There were a few others. I think Al Haidin, he was one of the OG Chinese MMA fighters. He had a gym going on in outside of Beijing. But the second MMA gym in China, second one open to the public, first one in Shanghai. And that might sound like a big deal, but nobody knew what it was. Again, it was the branding thing. Because when people don't recognize your brand, they don't know why they need to buy it. And so explaining what MMA was to people and why they should come to my gym was like pulling teeth. Like Chinese people are like, so it's like boxing? I'm like, well, yes, but no. Like, well, if boxing exists, why do we need that too? Like, well, it's more than boxing. So it's like, Sunda. Well, yes, but no, there's more. Like, what's the difference? Well, in this one, you wear little gloves. And like, why does that matter? And you can fight on the ground. Why does that matter? Why do I want to do that? Ew, gross.
Oh, okay. So you did get the gross when you explained the
It's a bit long
grappling.
time.
When you explained the grappling, people were put off by the grappling.
Oh yes, very much so. Very much. No, nobody cared about this stuff. So like anyone trying to teach jujitsu, like for example, Shanghai BJJ, one of the oldest Shanghai Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools in China, had a very hard time progressing. They've come a very long way since then. So when the UFC Shanghai event happened, and I went and watched that, and I saw people cheering when the fighters were doing highly technical things, I realized these aren't casual fans. These are hardcore fans who train. These are people who train, who are coming from all across the country to watch this event because there are not this many people in who train. And that was super interesting because I'd never seen an MMA event like that, not just filled with casual fans who like watching the sport, but it was filled with people who train in jiu-jitsu. Like everyone who trained in jiu-jitsu in the whole country had come. People who train in MMA, people who train in all these different combat sports gathered. I mean, have you ever been at a live MMA event where people weren't just saying stupid things like, punch him in the face, if I was in there, I'd kick him in the head. And instead, when somebody's going through the intricate steps of advancing position from their half guard, people are cheering each step along the way. And man, it was kind of mind blowing. I was like, whoa, it has come such a long way in the last decade. This is nuts. But when you can fill arenas with not just the hardcore fans, but the casuals as well, man, that's the next step along the way.
Yeah, I think even in
So I imagine probably another
even in
10 years before we
I
get
think
there.
even in Japan, I feel the same. A very similar thing is happening. Um, Even though MMA has
Yeah.
been out here for so long, once Pride disappeared from Japan, that's all anybody who maybe casually know of it, they'll mention Pride. And now because of the UFC,
Yeah.
once in a while the casual person will mention the UFC, but still for the most part, it's still a very martial arts based fan base of people. And
Yeah.
when I watch like on my Facebook feed, I'm friends now with a lot of pro MMA fighters out here, and they'll share their stuff. And I'm looking at the fights. I'm like, oh, I know that ref. That guy owns that gym, and oh, that person in the crowd there, that guy in the background, he owns that gym. So I can actually recognize their faces, and very similar thing where it's kind of being followed by the people participating in it. But kind of coming back and to wrap up your journey here, you're in China. You opened one of the second public MMA gyms.
Second one in the country, first one in Shanghai.
First one in Shanghai. And now you're coaching. What was that transition like? Because obviously, wait. Let me rephrase this. At one point, you retired from MMA and then started fighting, then started focusing more on coaching. When did that transition happen, and how did you work through that? Because I know a lot of fighters have a really difficult transition when they can't fight anymore. How did that work out for you?
Ooh. Well, I was coaching and I was fighting at the same time. But in 2011, I had my last professional fight. I fought Wong Guan, a Chinese fighter. Later went on to fight in the UFC. Tough guy, but he broke my skull, and so I had this massive injury. Like I don't know if you can see the light, but I got this hole in my head right there, a depressed skull fracture, and I had a crack all the way up the cranium. It left me with a blind spot in one eye, and every doctor I talked to was very adamant about hang up the gloves. You should never fight again. This is extremely dangerous, and I didn't like that answer. I got a second opinion, I got a third opinion, I got a fourth opinion, and so on. And every everyone told me the same thing until the last doctor. He told me something a little bit different. He said, look, I'm going to level with you. Fighting was dangerous before. Now it's going to be more dangerous. I won't tell you no, but that's the situation. And it wasn't until I read Dave Grossman's book On Killing where I realized what was going on there. It's a great book, On Killing by Dave Grossman, where he talks about combat addiction. And he tells a story about guys who went to war, and they went through these tours of duty, basically went through hell, but then they requested to do it again and again. Something no sane person would do. And when I read that, I realized, whoa, that's to a lesser extent what fighters are doing all the time. Because fighting kind of sucks. Like, very few people are honest about that. George St. Pierre is very honest about that. He'll tell you, I hated fighting. And that confuses people because he was so good at it. But nobody likes the pre-fight anxiety. Nobody loves that. People love winning. They love landing punches. They love executing their game plan. They love the adrenaline rush. They don't love the negative anxiety. They don't love the damage. They don't love the pain. They don't love the dire consequences of fighting.
Driving home with a microfractured rib.
It's not all.
Driving home with a microfractured rib after the fight because your wife didn't drive you to the fight. You got to go home and your shin's busted and you're trying to figure out how to hit the brake and gas pedal. No one likes that part.
Exactly. Nobody loves that, man. Nobody loves that. So, yeah, man, it's so interesting that St. Pierre was one of the guys who was so honest about that and so prolific about that. He got challenged recently by, I forget who, some dude in the current UFC roster, and George just turned him down and said, no, I'm lucky, I'm fortunate, because most guys don't get out of the sport when they should. And, yeah, he's like, I'm done. I did what I set out. And that's a rare thing. It's a rare thing. As far as most fighters, like me, for example, I got injured, got cut down before I was ready, and I wanted to get back in there and do it again. A number of years later, Evangelista Cyborg Santos had the same injury as me. It was the third time it happened professionally in mixed martial arts. Second time happened to a guy in South Africa. But Cyborg, he got that big hole in his head when he fought Michael Venom Page, and he did that cool flying knee. And the first thing Cyborg posted on social media was, I'm going to make a comeback. I'm going to do it again. And then he posted pictures of the reconstructive surgery and all the bolts and stuff in his head. And he said, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to fight again. I'm looking at this like, no, he's not. He does not know what he's in for yet. He's not going to be able to fight again. But, he wants to, because it's combat addiction. It's what fighters do. Fighters show up to fight. Like, you got that warrior mentality. You got this I'll fight no matter what. If I have to cut a dangerous, deadly amount of weight to fight, I'll do it. If I have to fight a guy who's better than me, who will kill me instantly, I'll do it. I don't care. Just let me in that cage. It's an addiction. It's a real thing. So I went through withdrawals. I went through withdrawals for a long time. And when I would watch UFC fights, I would find myself like twitching, like trying to move through positions the way I would move when I see the other guy in a bad spot, be like, and I'm like, man, what am I doing? It reminded me so much of the time I got addicted to morphine. And let me tell you this story. When I was 21, I ended up hospitalized for the better part of a year. So I was hooked up to a morphine drip. And I had this pump, this switch. Every time I pushed it, it would give me a shot of morphine. So I get out of the hospital. I'm no longer hooked up to the morphine drip. And I'm sitting on the couch. I'm in college. My roommates are saying, Ramsey, what are you doing? I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, what are you doing with your hand? Like, I'm not doing anything with my hand. Meanwhile, my hand is going like this, reaching for the button to get my hit. And I'm like, I look over my hand. It's moving automatically. It is, I'm not doing this on purpose. It's just happening. I'm like, guys, I think I'm addicted to morphine. And they're like, what? Anyway. So you go through things like that. Your body starts moving like outside of your conscious control, and you just start craving, the positive aspects of fighting, not the negative ones. Obviously, you start looking at it through rose-colored glasses. And it took a while before I could start separating that and start seeing the world or seeing the world of fighting the way George St. Pierre talks about it, like, I hate fighting. And I realize, yeah, when you can see it that way and separate, the glory from the garbage, if you will, it, and screw your head on straight like a normal person, if you will, it gets really interesting. I think you can become a much more grounded coach, and you can help people in a much more grounded way. Because I see some guys, and there are some great coaches out there who fight at the same time, but some of them, and I've seen some of them who are great fighters and bad coaches, and they will try to push fighters into situations they should not push their fighters. And so I think, in a lot of ways, I have a lot more empathy now for fighters and the potential damage that they can go through. Man, there was a coach, and this is a terrible story. His fighter ends up with this massive swelling over the eye, and the coach just keeps trying to push him to go in there, and basically takes a spoon and to dig the eye open again so he can see, so the ref will let him go out there and fight again. The guy ends up blinded for life. And this is an extreme story. A precautionary tale for everybody. Just like rule number one of fighting is protect yourself at all times, rule number one for the coach should be very, very similar. Protect your fighters at all times. Make sure they are constantly in a position where they can protect themselves. I mean, you can't go in the cage and do it for them, but you have to do everything in your power to make sure that they are able to do that, protect themselves at all times. So, man, empathy and coaching, that goes a long way, I think.
So that was how you transitioned into only coaching, only teaching. And I guess for my last question, so you focus more on teaching. You're in Shanghai, China. I'll have two more questions, but this is the last question pertaining to your journey.
Sure.
This is a question I ask all my guests, all the coaches, all the instructors. What's the advice you have for anyone listening on the internet, for anybody watching this on YouTube? What's the advice you have for anyone who's interested in training in martial arts and they're just not sure where to start? What's your advice for them?
Just start somewhere. Start somewhere. Oh, I get questions. I get this question every day on YouTube. My YouTube fans send me this question in some iteration or other. Usually they'll give me their resume of every street fight they've ever had, and they'll be like, how do I pick the absolute best martial art possible? Because I don't want to go to a McDojo. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of, people making fun of them and doing something goofy and believing in it, falling prey to a martial arts cult, basically. And I'll tell them, don't be afraid to make every mistake, because you need to. Start with the goofiest thing ever. I don't care. Start with Krav Maga, right? I don't care, right? Just start. Because once you start, you're going to start seeing what you couldn't see before, right? We can only see what we have the context of experience to see. I mean, I'll often teach a technique. You probably had this experience too, and then people will look at you and say, well, I've never seen that move in a fight, even though it may be a fairly common technique in a fight, because they didn't know what to look for before, right? A lot of people, they'll, like spider guard, no gi spider guard. A lot of people don't even know that's a thing, because they're used to holding on to the sleeves with the gi on there, and that's the only thing they can see as spider guard. Whereas if you're in an MMA fight, you go from close guard, push up the body with your feet, to a spider guard where you have your feet on the hips and you're controlling the arms. You're only there for like that long, and then you transition to butterfly or get up or something like that. But people don't see it until they recognize the technique, right? So, man, where was I going with that? I was trying to make an important point.
People that
Hold on, I'm blanking. This is one of the
doesn't
drawbacks,
matter
so.
where you start, just start.
Yes, just start. Just start, because the experience, even a bad experience, will give you context of experience so that you can see where you need to go from there. So if you go to the crappy Krav Maga McDojo, okay, and you have a bad experience, then you know what to look for in your next school. You know you know what the red flags are from firsthand experience. Like, people want me to give them everything on a silver platter, and I can you in some general directions, right? Anybody with the context of experience can point you in some good general directions. Like, I can say, go take a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class, go learn how to wrestle, go take a boxing class, go take a kickboxing class, go join an MMA gym. A lot of people get mad at that, though, because they're like, well, I love traditional martial arts and Bruce Lee, and so that runs contrary to my paradigm. Well, those are good general cues. Go take a combat sport, because those are real and people spar and they get instant feedback on what they're doing. And so that can give you some good general ideas of where to go, right? But try everything. But rule number 1, do something. Do something. Rule number 2, do something that you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, you won't keep doing it. Like, I got a question recently from this guy who said, I know that I should be doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I really hate it. I've been doing it for years, and I really, really hate it, and it makes me unhappy and depressed, and I go home unable to sleep because it sucks so much. I'm like, well, try something else. And he's like, but I feel like I'm supposed to. Do what makes you happy, man. So not everybody needs to be a cage fighter. Not everybody needs to do jiu-jitsu. Not everybody needs to do boxing. Everybody needs to train, I think, in some way or another, but not everybody needs to follow the same mold, you know? Now, if you have a very specific goal, if your goal is to be UFC champion of the world, you have to train in ways that facilitate that process. If your goal is to be an Aikido instructor, you have to learn Aikido. You have to learn the traditions, right? But if your goal is just do anything, then just do anything, right? So the third thing, after do something you enjoy, otherwise you won't continue doing it in the long run. Do something effective, right? And you learn what's effective through the context of experience. So there is my advice for people who ask that question. Step number 1, just go somewhere, do something, anything. If you don't even have a martial arts school in your town, do what I did. Go to the library, check out a book, look at a YouTube video, get some friends together in your front yard, try it out.
All right. Well, there it is, folks, on YouTube. And then for those of you listening, do something. Now, my last, not really a question. I guess it is kind of a question. Where can people find you? I'm sure I know of you. I'm guessing a lot of my listeners and viewers, not that many, but they may or may not know of you. Where can they find you? And I guess this is a 2-part question. Where can they find you online? And if people want to train with you, where can they find you to train?
Okay. Most prominently online, you can find my YouTube channel. It's Ramsey Dewey. It's my name, the Ramsey Dewey channel. So just Google my name. You'll find an endless stream of videos from me on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram. I think my Instagram handle is also Ramsey Dewey. It may be one word or not. I'm not sure. But there are not a lot of... I don't think there are any fake Ramsey Dewey accounts on Instagram. I think I'm on Twitter. I don't know how to use Twitter, but I think I'm on there. What else? I'm on WeChat. If you're in China, send me a Weixin friend invite. I think my WeChat handle is also Ramsey Dewey. You notice a pattern going here. So if you want to find me online, just look up my name. Ramsey Dewey, Ramsey Dewey. And in person, right now I'm at the UFL gym in Shanghai, China. That is 2029 Hechuan Road. We're on the 2nd floor. So stop by, try out a class for free. Again, 2029 Hechuan Road, UFL gym. Come check us out.
All right, so that's where you can find them. Ramsey, thank you very much for being on the show and sharing your experiences and your knowledge and your wisdom and your story with me and the listeners and viewers here on YouTube. And for my listeners and viewers, stay tuned for the wrap-up. And that's a wrap. Thank you very much for checking out Social Gelo with Angelo. If you still are around and you want to support the show, check out www.socialgelo.com. Scroll down to the Amazon banner and do some shopping. Doesn't cost you anything. Zero. Costs you zero. And they'll send a little bit of my way just for you helping out and showing that you watch the show. And I really appreciate it for you listeners out there. I appreciate you very much. I'm growing very slowly, but surely the show is growing, and I really do appreciate that. And for all of you out there in dangerous areas, trying to stay safe, trying to stay healthy, please continue to do so. I'm not an expert in that field. I'm not going to even mention it, but I am going to say that this episode was released in the middle of the second wave of the coronavirus. And my heart goes out to anybody affected by it. And my heart, in any way, whether it's economically, or I know a lot of gyms have had to close. And my heart definitely goes out to those people. And also my heart goes out to the people that were affected by it in their health. Because I know a lot of my friends caught it and got really sick, and they're still recovering. And definitely. Much love and respect. And I'll catch you all next time. Peace.